considerations on the theme of radical deconstruction. So I had a poster. Apparently, it suggested to me anyway, kind of how should I say, a disingenuous or lampooning usage of the word radical. Of course, the word radical is part of standard language as a kind of slang word. But I think it may be more in California than in other states, but maybe everywhere. But no, not that it's used anymore, but it has been historically, as it were. But in this case, we'll try to show what radical means in the context of deconstruction of the question about the origin of the Western tradition, specifically on the point of the distinction between ethics and nature, because these two have been historically set out as though they were two different things, and that's come down to us today, up until today, in one way or another. So let's just kind of, and then I'm asking, must we sort of disgrace and reject this lineage, seeing that we can see through to the core of it, to the bottom of it, and that it's tangential, that it's, or as it were, obdurate, that it's on a specific course which is infinitely confused, and maybe it's to be rejected, although goodness only knows what that could possibly mean. Rejected in favor of what? I suppose what it would mean is, there's some people that have. It's very hard to say without reinitiating the tradition in some sense, and then, because immediately one would want to say, yes, you have an ignorant person who's never heard anything about philosophy and doesn't act on philosophical motives, and they're an atheist, and they read, the only high books that they read would be by Richard Dawkins. And of course there's lots of people like that, and there's people that don't even read Richard Dawkins. They probably read some other things which are full of high ideology, telling you that you have to be both democratic in spirit or not democratic in spirit, that you have to be for freedom or for self-governance, or otherwise you have to be for something else. In other words, you have to be for liberty or not for liberty. And there'll be things that we'll have heard which are peculiar to America, especially, but they won't know that they're peculiar to America. Just like there's different things, different habits, slightly in Southern California than there are in Northern California. Things aren't all the same everywhere, but sometimes we don't notice which quirks are due to coming from a certain place. think like using the word cracker, like a white guy referring to himself as a cracker in order to show that like he gets it. He's just the same as a black guy in the South. Something like that. That way of talking only exists for people that are from the South. But people from California or from the North, I think, never use that type of language. Just like until some time ago, there's people spoke of a polecat instead of in certain areas. Maybe they still do today. But where most people in the standard language speak of a skunk, there's some relationship between the local customs and the language used, in that sense of that there's a leveling and formalization of universal English or something like that, that affects all English usage, and then there's only some regional, as though soul reclaiming of the language. Although I suppose it's done often in the form of commercial pop cultures, like that word "may." That's apparently taken off from The Simpsons. The way ethics split off from physics early on, and that got to be a habit. It's kind of a way of doing things, a way of doing what the Germans call Wissenschaft, or episteme, what the Greeks called themselves episteme. Although there was no such thing as epistemology. That's important. I think that's always sort of, I don't know, it's sort of a certain level of one's philosophic awareness that becomes important to want to know things like that. But then, of course, at another level, you've already heard it for a long time. But it is important because episteme, or science in the sense of Wissenschaft, which Heidegger says is formed in the same way that Landschaft, or landscape, is formed, and it names a kind of region. So there's the region where the Wissen, or the knowledge, comes from, as it were, and it's a scape. A landscape has different features within it, from where the datum, or the given thing, is found, appropriate to that subject matter. So we've grown into making this distinction between ethics and physics for thousands of years. And so for instance, let's give a little bit of a tour then of the beginning of it. Zune, so like we could say or Zoe, we could say, this is one of Agamben's subjects, I believe, in a big way. And also we tried to do this on the Owen and the Agon thing with Agamben, but I couldn't. Because Agamben is very advanced, so I couldn't quite get everything from his book that I would have, if I was understood the way into the avenue of invasion into that. But I think I'm trying to get there with this, which is that say Zune Politikon, the Aristotelian formula, that we could juxtapose with the way he uses the word bios. He uses bios to say that there's a specific way of life, such as the way of life of a statuary, or a chord swain, or a philosopher, or etc. So bios becomes like the word biography in that sense, whereas and then connected to ethics, because we see it from within. We see the ethical choices. We see the man as related to his fellows. And isonomia is the old ancient Greek democratic formula. Is everyone has. They tried to give everyone the same, realizing that there's, for instance, the deems are contrasted with the people that are living by the Horaeus, and the old money families also have different interests, and that they try to make everyone equal. That's known since antiquity, and it's a subject of ethical discussion. And this type of, and so ethics gets set off as bios, whereas then the Zoe becomes, Zoon. So I guess Zoon Politikon, we should remember the political animal. Okay, but he's not saying human beings are, I mean, that doesn't say anything special about human beings, in fact, because Aristotle also says there's these other Zoe are living things, such as ants. And ants have, because they all work together to a common purpose, he regards that as political animals. So he says some animals are solitary. That's bear in the woods or something. That's contrasted with the political animals. But the political animals are just the ones that work together in a group in some sense. So in this sense, to say, that anthropos or human being is a political animal is not as specific. I mean, that's not. It distinguishes them from the animals that are non-political or solitary animals, but it doesn't say that. It's not really an essential statement about them. When he makes the essential statement about human beings, it's that we have access to the truth. We're rational animals. That we're rational animals is the specific difference of the human being by comparison to any other animal. So that's much more important. But this distinction between, so in a way it's a distinction between if a human being were regarded as something outside, infusus, in the exterior, if you talk about them as the Zoon Politikon, as a political animal, just like we're talking about ants. But when we talk about them as ethical animal, then we look at this other evidence, right? So we see this confusion about, in fact, so this is a confusion about what psychology is, what psychology is. And it's this type of question that causes all the furor around Husserl's attempts to go into this thicket of mess and find agapanthus, or find a good lead on the way to the truth. So, you could see how the question of radicality shows up here, is that there's questions here like that, we have this problem that the origin of this distinction between sort of the outer meaning of a human being as comparable to an ant, and the ethical meaning whereby we regard the human being in a biographical sort of historical way, and things appear totally differently. We have this basic starting point where things are already, threads are being knit together and an infinite combination is forming. So that shows, now contrast that with somebody who's just going along where their textbook is the ethics. There's something called deontic ethics, and then there's some other kind of ethics, and then memorize that, and there'll be a quiz at a certain point. So that's a very unradical. That's the 101 textbook memorization type level. Beyond that, then you could do a PhD without ever getting to investigate the actual difficulties in the matter, because you'd still be looking at all the different opinions about morality. Why is it important? What's its origins? How did we come to talk about this? And it would all be still disconnected from the phenomenon. So partially then the reason why we could say phenomenology got a lot of hype around it is it seems to give us a dose of radicality in that sense.